This is Brian from Transreal News and Swords Against Madness. I hope you've got a sword with you, as you've arrived where chaos rolls. You're listening to Tale of the Manticore.
The following podcast is intended for a mature audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Tale of the Manticore, Season 3. Like the creature from which it takes its name, Tale of the Manticore is a mashup, a crossbreeding between two different species of storytelling. Here you will find the unpredictability of old-school paper and dice games with the storycraft of a dark fantasy novel. No character is sacred, and none will be spared if the dice decide their fate is at hand. According to lore, the tail of a manticore is barbed with cruel iron spikes. There will be much pain in the days ahead. Last time on Tale of the Manticore. Chapter 6 concerns the resolution of a single random encounter. Achillea hears the sound of someone being whipped. When she investigates, she finds 3 orcs playing a game with a captive, whipping him to see who can make him cry out the loudest. Achillea might have set moral obligation aside and moved on, but she hears the captive speak words in Elvish and knows, then and there, that she has to attempt a rescue. She sneaks up on the camp and casts her only spell, Shrink, on the captive, so he might slip free of the manacles around his wrists. The spell works, and once the captive is free, she calls out in Elvish for him to follow her. Perhaps thinking his own people have come to his aid, the captive runs in her direction, but the orcs give chase. Unfortunately for them, the monsters are heavily encumbered and fall quickly behind. Eventually, they give up. Once at a safe distance, Achillea stops for her party to regroup and to meet the person she's liberated. When he arrives, he's thankful, but also somewhat suspicious. He asks how it is that she speaks the Elvish tongue, but he does not seem to accept her answer. Chapter 7, Part 1, Day 6, Night. Party status: Achillea, 4 out of 4 hit points. Cord, 6 out of 6 hit points. Supplies: the companions have no food and 2 portions of water remaining. Spells available: there are no spells available.
I can speak Elvish because I am an elf,
She replied.
No, you are not,
Said the other slowly.
Why do you say that?
Asked Achillea.
because I am an elf, and you do not look like me.
Achillea was thunderstruck. It took a moment for her to form a reply. She settled on,
I can only tell you what I have always known.
while presenting her hands, palms up, in a gesture of helplessness. A silence then stretched out that was too long for comfort, and the former captive sighed.
At any rate, one thing is certain. You have saved me, and I am in your debt. My name is Direni, of the Satevi Marsh tribe.
Well met, Direni of the Satevi Marsh. I'm called Achillea Muog, apprentice to Master Udve Muog.
She paused to see if the name would have any effect on the other. It did not.
These are my companions, Cord and Robin.
She pointed to Cord, who watched the conversation he could not understand patiently, then to Robin, now, once again, sitting on her head. Surprisingly, Direni did not seem overly moved by the presence of a wooden construct. His attention had been firmly on Achillea the whole time. Now, instead of looking at Cord, his eye was drawn up to Robin.
Your bird is wounded, it would appear, and possibly blind as well.
Achillea started, then laughed, understanding the error. She put up her hand, and Robin immediately jumped upon it. She presented Robin to Direni, who peered at it while furrowing his eyebrows.
Robin is a stuffed bird.
She laughed, while Direni squinted at the poorly stitched skin, revealed under Robin's patchy feathers.
She may not be my master's most skilled work, but she is not hurt, and she can see perfectly well, despite appearances.
Dureni looked from Robin to Cord, and something seemed to occur to him.
Perhaps you are of high elven blood, then, if your master can work such magic. At least, this is unlike any enchantment I've seen before.
I've not heard of high elves, or any kinds of elves, for that matter. What do you mean?
As for first-hand experience, mine is limited to the elves of my own tribe, but there are other tribes, and I have heard that there is a race of elves that live in cities, as the menfolk do. Truly, I had always thought the high elves a children's fable.
Where is your tribe, Dureni?
Asked Achillea. Dureni considered.
2 days' walk from here. I was on a hunt when the orcs caught me.
You hunt so far from home?
Asked Achillea, more out of curiosity than suspicion.
Something has driven away the fauna from our lands.
The orcs, perhaps, if there are more of them.
Thracendia forbid, but perhaps, yes.
Was the reply. Achillea bit her lip, and then she asked,
Dureni, would you take me, us, to meet the rest of your people?
When I made a reaction roll upon Dureni and Achillea's first meeting, I got a modified 8, which is slightly positive, but still uncertain. This makes sense, given that both parties claim to be elven while looking slightly different from each other. Now that the ice is somewhat broken, I think it's time for a second check. This will be to determine whether or not Dureni is willing to bring Achillea and her companions home with him. I'm reducing the previous bonus of +3 to +1 for this roll, in light of his lukewarm initial reaction. Here goes. On 2d6, higher is better. 8 + 1 is 9. Okay, the dice gods seem to want this relationship to develop a little more. That 9 is giving me yes, but vibes. Since I have my bowl of dice at hand, I'm going to take this chance to roll up a new event meaning to replace the spent one. On D percentile, 85 and 93. That's negligence and weather. Well, that seems fairly straightforward. I might need to wait a while before using it, but I guess you never know. Chapter 7. Part 2. Day 7. Morning. Mythic event meaning. Negligence, weather. Party status. Achillea, 4 out of 4 hit points. Cord, 6 out of 6 hit points. Supplies. The companions have no food and 2 portions of water remaining. Spells available. Achillea has memorized Shrink. Hours earlier, having built some trust between them, Achillea, her companions, and Dureni had decided to find a concealed spot where they could make camp. They'd been exhausted, and it had grown late. In the morning, Achillea awoke to powder pink dawn sky. The woods were gowned in mist. She studied for an hour before waking Dureni. Once he was awake, they shared her water skin, and between the two of them, nearly drained it. Breakfast was not available, and Achillea's stomach was beginning to growl. Even more than the many dangers of the wilds, food had become her biggest problem. On the bright side, she now had a competent guide. They decided they would try foraging while on the march. Dureni said it would be wiser to get home quickly rather than on a full stomach. Judging by his willowy frame, Achillea guessed that he was used to going without. But as for her, she had never experienced hunger before, and she knew she would feel the discomfort more acutely. Before they set out, Achillea decided to extend her trust a little further and asked Dureni if he had heard of a person named Audok. She also asked him if he recognized any of the scenes in the sketchbook as she showed it to him. The expert rule said that there are 2 ways to acquire food in the wilderness. Characters can forage while on the move. A d6 is rolled, and on a 1, they'll find 1 to 6 portions of food. The other choice is to stop and spend a full day hunting. The rules seem a bit vague here, but I think the idea is that the 1 to 6 portions are guaranteed. However, there's a cost. An additional wandering encounter roll must be made for that day. Considering the high chance for such an encounter, that option is truly risky, and I think Dureni may have the right idea in pushing ahead. I'll make the foraging roll now. On a d6, hoping for a 1. A 2. Nuts, or rather, no nuts, berries, or otherwise. As we've started a new day, there's a few more rolls to make. For weather, a 9. Decent weather means I won't be using my event meaning today. Next to stumble upon. Holy cow, another one. What are the chances of that happening again so soon? Does this mean that, like with Ido, that the escaped danger has caught up with them? I'll roll a high-low. High means it has, on a d20. Another one! Alright, I wasn't expecting that. It means something really bad is going to happen. Let's take a quick ad break to give me the time to come up with an idea. The weather was about the only thing that cooperated with them that day. To start, Direni turned out to be unfamiliar with the name Audok and could not identify the places pictured in Achillea's book. Furthermore, the terrain became less forgiving with each passing mile. By noon, the land had already started to become difficult, putting in their way steep rises and gullies that could not be circumnavigated. Achillea found herself winded by the ascents, and the declines were almost as bad, slowing them down when they became precariously steep. Furthermore, there was no water to be found anywhere. When she asked, Direni insisted that this was the way they needed to go. He admitted that he hadn't been through this area before, but he seemed confident in their direction, as if he possessed an internal compass. Some time after the sun had passed its zenith and the afternoon was well underway, the party passed by an enormous mound with the face of bald rock. The surface was riddled with holes, dozens of cave openings, ranging from the size of a fist to as much as 3 feet across. Achillea looked at it nervously, and Direni confirmed her thoughts.
Best to steer wide of that place. It has a bad look to it.
They had just put the caves to their backs, feeling prematurely fatigued, and just beginning to experience the pangs of hunger and thirst, when ill fortune struck. As they crested the next steep rise, perhaps only 100 yards away, another party of orcs, and this one was bigger than the last. There were 5 of the pig-faced brutes. Worse, they were spotted right away. With a battle cry, all 5 charged towards them, fanning out and waving axes, swords, and clubs above their heads. Back the way they came would be the only means of escape, and Achillea practically ran down the incline they had just climbed with such effort. It was a miracle that she didn't trip. Her feet seemed to barely touch the ground as she threw herself forward so quickly that she as much fell down the slope as ran down it. Her arms pinwheeled madly when she reached the bottom, still somehow maintaining her balance. Without breaking stride, she dashed straight ahead. Direni was right at her side.
To the caves!
He yelled between hard breaths. They made the caves with the orcs having closed the gap so that they were only a few dozen yards away, and, choosing a hole just large enough that they could crawl through, escaped. They found themselves in a short, naturally formed tunnel that opened into a larger pocket. While their enemy threatened and cursed from the outside, they caught their breath and, as their infravision took over, regarded their new surroundings. The earlier stumble upon roll of 1 means that the party is going to face risk without any chance for reward. I mention this because the orcs waiting for them outside are not the PC's only problem. There's a chance that the caves in this hill might not be interconnected, and so Achillea and her companions might find themselves trapped. I wonder what the chances would be. I don't know much about geology, so I'll just make a high-low roll. High means there's another way out. Rolling a d20. Whew. An 11. Thank goodness for that. In the grayscale of their dark vision, they took in their new surroundings. They were in a kidney-shaped space that measured perhaps 20 feet in length and 10 feet across at the widest part. The walls here were irregular, cracked and pockmarked in some places, smooth in others. There was an ominous-looking crawlspace opening at the far end. The place felt cool and damp. It smelled of mold. Achillea turned to look back through the entrance tunnel, and her boots scuffed the loose dirt that covered the floor.
Do you think there's any chance they might give up and leave?
Not much. Orcs are stubborn.
Came Direni's matter-of-fact reply.
But they are also nocturnal, so they'll have to sleep at some point. Achillea, might I borrow one of those?
He looked at the pair of daggers on her belt meaningfully. Achillea only considered for a moment before passing him one. She couldn't leave him defenseless.
Of course. Good idea. But do you think we might be able to slip past them without a fight?
Not from here. They'll post a sentry right outside that opening. Our only real hope is if that,
and here he pointed at the crawl space,
leads to another exit large enough for us to pass through.
It was fortunate that they were so small. Even Cord, who stood 6 feet tall, was slender enough that he'd been able to follow them in with considerable ease. Both constructs, furthermore, could see in the dark, as their vision did not depend on any physical organs, but was magical in nature.
Then let's find out if it does.
Agreed,
said Dureni, and he took the lead. Achillea fell in behind, and Cord brought up the rear, holding Robin in his hand. As Dureni crouched down to crawl into the little gap, Achillea saw the whip welts on his back, up close for the first time. It was amazing her new companion was still standing, she thought. His fortitude inspired her to be brave when, a few seconds later, it was her turn to get down on all fours and crawl into the little opening. The claustrophobia came almost immediately. With the tunnel roof just an inch above her head and the rocky tunnel walls close enough that they grazed her shoulders, the feeling of being completely vulnerable, unable to move if anything were to happen, was almost too much to bear. The further in they got, the faster her heart beat, and a rising sensation began in her brain that grew stronger and stronger, until it seemed her sense of vision and hearing were constricted like the tunnel she crawled through. She broke into a sweat as panic threatened to take over her senses. Dramatis Personae, Achillea. 15 years ago. Achillea was 6 years old when her formal apprenticeship to Aldve began, and she started to learn the secrets of magecraft. For the first year, the sole topic of her lessons was meditation.
Without clarity of mind, you'll never achieve the concentration required for even the most basic spell.
That was the sentence with which Achillea began her journey into wizardry. She took a seat on a mat of reeds and awaited further instruction.
Cross your legs so that the tips of your toes and the outer edge of your thighs form a single line.
She did as she was told.
Good. Now, lower your knees to the mat, straighten your back, push back your bottom, hips forward.
Achillea let slip a laugh at the mention of her bottom, and Aldve patiently allowed it. Then, with a gentle look that asked, "Are we ready to continue?" he said,
Ears in line with the shoulders, nose in line with your navel, yes, like so. Tongue lightly behind your top teeth. Eyes open.
By this point, Achillea was settled and, as a natural student, had committed herself to doing things correctly. Aldve's instruction continued.
Take long, even breaths, but do not try to control your breathing. Be aware of your thoughts. When various notions enter your mind, neither pursue nor try to escape from them. Instead, allow them to come and go freely.
Achillea tried to do all this.
The mind is like the surface of a pond, Beckme. If the wind blows, the surface is disturbed. There are ripples. It's difficult to see beneath the surface, even though the water is clear and pure.
Achillea stirred. Her attention had already slipped, and she felt as though she were failing. Aldve did not address it, but simply went on.
Accept tranquility. Do not think, I am breathing. There is no mind, there is no body. Let go of time and space. Let go of body and mind. And just be.
Some of her fears were legitimate. If the tunnel ahead dead-ended or tapered to a point where they could go no further, they'd be forced to crawl backward all that way. Other fears were irrational. If the tunnel collapsed behind them, they might find themselves entombed in this hill forever. But Achillea, after so many years of study, knew how to master her thoughts. She'd been practicing for years. Acknowledging that they were the winds of blind panic, she willed her thoughts to be calm. They crawled forward slowly, navigating a number of turns and drops before the tunnel mercifully opened up into another pocket. Dureni was the first out and on his feet, dusting off his knees. He held forth a hand to help Achillea out, and then came Cord, holding Robin.
There's a light ahead,
said the elf, his voice hopeful.
Let's take a look,
replied Achillea. It was above a stone ledge they would have to climb over, but it seemed manageable. Dureni had only taken a few steps when his foot struck a little mound of dirt. Some movement caught his eye, and when he looked down, the floor seemed to be coming alive. Dureni has just disturbed the nest of 3 giant centipedes. I rolled up this encounter in advance and off mic, and it was partially generated at random. At first, I rolled a high-low to see if any monster would be encountered as the PCs searched for a second exit from the cave system. It wasn't a sure thing, but unfortunately I determined that, yes, there would be. By DM fiat, I decided that the encounter would be with 2 to 5 giant centipedes, and rolled a 3 for that. Next I rolled for the centipede's hit points, and I rolled a 1. This is a good time to bring up a homebrew rule I use in Tale of the Manticore. When I roll for monsters' hit points, if I get anything less than half the maximum number, I raise that number to half. You'll often hear me refer to minning out. This is something I do to keep encounters from being overly easy. So these giant centipedes, which have a half a hit die, get 2 hit points each. 50% of their maximum of 4, even though I rolled a 1. With hit points worked out, the only thing left to roll for was surprise. I ended up getting a 5 for the centipedes and a 4 for the party, so neither side would be surprised. I think that gives us all we need to proceed, and it also brings us to the first battle of Season 3.
Entering combat.
There are several versions of giant centipedes from edition to edition of D&D, and I'll be using the ones found in the basic rules. These creatures measure a foot long, have an armor class of 11, and their bite, while it does no damage, is poisonous. The poison is not deadly, but instead causes serious illness on a failed saving throw. Let's begin. Round 1. Initiative. The giant centipedes. A 1. The party. A 6. Well, that is decisive. When Dureni disturbs the giant centipede's nest, the insect's first instinct is to scatter before turning around to attack. Dureni needs an 11 to hit with his borrowed dagger. His roll. An 18! Well done, Dureni. Damage will be 4 points. He cuts one of the ugly creatures in half. Achillea is up next. She also needs an 11. A 6 will not do it. Her initial revulsion is so strong, she cannot bring herself to get in close. I'm sure Cord will have no problem with that. As his axe comes down, he too needs an 11 or better on a d20 to score a hit. A 14 on the die is good enough. His axe will do 1 to 6 points of damage. The roll. A 2. Not a great roll, but it is enough to squash this bug into paste. It's the last remaining centipede's turn to attack, but in light of the party's initial success, I'm rolling a morale check to see if it will flee. Giant centipedes have a fairly low morale score, only a 7. Any roll of that amount or greater on 2d6 indicates flight. The roll. Snake eyes. I think this nest must contain eggs or young, and so the last centipede will fight to the death. I'll determine its target at random. It's Dureni, and since he's not only unarmored, but naked from the waist up, the insect only needs a 10 to hit him. The roll. A 5. Dureni manages to kick it against the wall, where it writhes and twists.
Yeah!
It's round 2. Initiative. The giant centipede. A 6. The party. A 1. That's an interesting reversal of fortune. The PCs thought that kick had killed the insect until it came rippling back with uncanny speed. Its target will once again be determined by a random roll. It's poor Dureni again. Payback for the kick, maybe. Anyway, a 10 is needed to hit. And this time it does, with a 17. The awful thing climbs right up the elf's leg, and then he feels it bite him below the knee. Now Dureni has to make a saving throw versus poison. At first level, the elf needs to roll a 12 or better. Here goes. A 16. He makes the save and brushes off the centipede before the venom is injected. Now it's the PC's turn. Dureni will make his attack. A 14 hits, and damage will be 2 points. The elf's boot comes down hard, right on top of the centipede, and flattens it into a gluey pancake. With that, combat is over, and looking at my runtime, so is this episode. Thanks so much for listening to Tale of the Manticore. If you're enjoying the show and would like to help to support it, there are lots of ways to do so. You can recommend the show online with your friends. You can like and repost episode announcements on social media. You can pick up one of my offerings on DriveThruRPG. You can purchase a Tale of the Manticore t-shirt at www.beararts.store. And finally, you can rate or review the show on your podcatcher of choice. I'm grateful for all of your kind support. I enjoy sharing a listener review at the end of each episode. This one was left by Jagvet Intavad Jagska Heta. Jagvet Intavad Jagska Heta writes, "Just so good." I'm guessing my Swedish is lacking, and I hope I didn't butcher that too badly. When I promised much pain in the days ahead, I wasn't referring to my pronunciation, but there you go. At any rate, thanks very much for that short but sweet review. Much appreciated. Anyway. I have 2 voice actors on the show today. Kai Ellen is back, playing the rescued elf Dureni. Also returning is Andrew Fling in the role of Achillea's father and mentor, Aldve Muag. As always, these 2 nailed their parts, and I'm truly grateful. Thanks, guys. For those curious to learn a bit more about Tale of the Manticore, I keep a blog where I post all kinds of show and RPG-related stuff, like art, maps, tables, crafts, and show notes. You can find it at taleofthemanticore.blogspot.com. To get in touch with me, I'm at Manticore Tale on X, Tale of the Manticore Podcast on Instagram, or taleofthemanticore@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. The adventure will continue on the next episode of Tale of the Manticore, the story where chaos rolls.